We can care about sow personality to understand some sows that may be more vulnerable than others. So there are some sows that are not very resilient to stress, whether it's social stress in the group or a change that's happening in the barn. Um, those individuals are ones that maybe we could target of like, let's keep an eye on this one because if there's any illness going around, they might be the first ones to get sick. Whereas we have very um, kind of resilient, robust sows that kind of cope with stress very well, and they're managing it really well with their behavioral strategies. So that's one reason why we could care about sow personality, how it can impact their survival.
Welcome to the Swine Canada podcast show, brought to you by Wisenetics. We are dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the Canadian pork industry. My name is Miranda Smith, and I'll be hosting today's episode. And today's guest is Dr. Kristina Horback. She's going to talk about sow personality. So Kristina Horback is an associate professor of applied ethology at the University of California, Davis. And we'll have a discussion, as I mentioned, about sow personality, which I think is a very interesting topic and something that we haven't, at least I haven't heard much about. So I'm very interested about this today's episode. So, but yeah, before we get started on that, Kristina, for those people who didn't listen to your previous episode, can you give us a little bit of an introduction on who you are and how you ended up at today's role and looking at sow personality?
Yes, certainly. Thank you for having me here again today. Um, so while I am housed in the Department of Animal Science at UC Davis, my background is not animal science, but psychology. My master's and PhD are in experimental psychology, where I've focused research on communication, learning, and personality in species ranging from African elephants to orcas to bonobo chimpanzees. So, with that training and how do animals think, I moved into the University of Pennsylvania's veterinary school to get into the education of how do animals feel. So, working with veterinarians as now a researcher at the vet school, my species focused moved to pigs, and in particular, sows. So, I've been studying sows, sow welfare, and sow behavior since 2012. And they are one of my favorite species now, even after working with all those famous romantic species. Pigs are phenomenal.
Well, and that's funny, right? Because a lot of us didn't grow up with a background in pork production or pigs in general, but once we get introduced to pigs, we just don't look back, right?
Right, exactly. Yes, they're very charming. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And so I guess that's one of the things that we're going to talk about, maybe like how charming they are, but maybe not all of them are as charming.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about like what is sow personality?
Yes, certainly. Depending on my audience, sometimes I get giggles when I mention that research topic. Um, Personality is really just an appropriate term to describe an animal's behavior that is consistent over time, like meaning it's not just in wintertime or summertime or in the morning or nights, many, many time points, and over contexts, meaning at feeding time or at mating time, or when they're looking at different places to sleep. Um, if that animal has a consistent style of how they respond and how they act, so maybe one animal is more risk taking than another, meaning that they will travel further from their home base than others, they will get closer to predators than others to get that food resource, they will take on an opponent for access to a mate much bigger than them that they're probably going to lose that fight. These risk takers could be called bold in safety quotes, lack of a better word of how to describe it. It's a style of interacting and surviving that's different than an individual that is the same sex, the same age, maybe very similar genetics, but the other individual never takes risks, always has small rewards, doesn't go far from home, doesn't really interact with many others that are threatening, and that's their survival style. So personality is studied in a variety of wild species, fish, birds, mammals, and it's the study of how evolution has kind of targeted different strategies of survival. It's not just one path. And with sow personality, that is, it's still there within swine. We've domesticated them only 9,000 years ago. It's not very long. And they still have that same evolutionary pressure, find resources, find mates, find food, so on. Um, and in that pressure, there's different styles. So we're going to have some sows that are more bold and more shy in how they interact with like the physical environment or with people or with other sows. Um, and we're also going to have some sows that are more aggressive than others, how they interact with other people or other sows, always having a shorter threshold for a full hostile response. Whereas others, it'll take a lot for them to have an outburst of a hostile response. And it's not their opponent. It's not because it's early in the morning or just because it's about food. It's no matter what, they're always responding in that way. Then that's personality. So that's what sow personality is. It's a behavioral trait. It's a style of interacting with their environment.
Okay, very interesting. So does this sow personality then play into like where they are in the hierarchy in a group?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one could assume that the really aggressive ones get to be dominant because they have a strategy to start fights. But those that are highly aggressive don't actually win fights. It's just that they're aggressive. So they are maybe the ones that have more surface scratches, body lesions, and they may not have consistent resting partners, whereas sows do have preferential resting partners, sort of like their own social grouping. The hyper aggressive ones don't seem to fall in line with the social etiquette of sows. So the dominant sows, and this is seen in other species too that have dominance hierarchies, the most dominant ones are not the most aggressive. They don't have a need to be aggressive. They smell dominant, especially for pigs. That's a smell that they give off. So the others don't challenge them and there's no need to get into a fight. So no, aggression does not equal dominance.
Oh, that's very interesting. But to be honest, I think it's kind of similar in horses.
Ah,
Because like I think the alpha mare is often not the one that is the most aggressive one. It's the ones below them that are kind of trying
exactly.
to figure it out. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So now, like when it comes to pigs, though, why would we care about sow personality?
Right. Yeah, that's a really great question too. In terms of sows are managed kind of like a one size fits all for our management of sows. This is what they eat. This is where they rest. This is where they fare out. Um, but what we find from other species like horses, there's a lot of horse personality research out there. We find out that the individual their choices and how they take in information and then how they respond to it, they have a full fear response, and so then that triggers their immunity to become weaker and weaker if they're constantly aroused, their cortisol level, so on and so forth. um, the individual's personality could actually impact their ability to fight infections, their retention of pregnancies, and so on. There's just so much that's kind of, you can't tease apart behavior with physiology and how all of that goes into survival mode. So we can care about sow personality to understand some sows that may be more vulnerable than others. So there are some sows that are not very resilient to stress, whether it's social stress in the group or a change that's happening in the barn. Those individuals are ones that maybe we could target of like, let's keep an eye on this one, because if there's any illness going around, they might be the first ones to get sick. Whereas we have very kind of resilient, robust sows that kind of cope with stress very well, and they're managing it really well with their behavioral strategies. So that's one reason why we could care about sow personality, how it can impact their survival. And then another one is understanding how the individual behavior trait could or could not make the group cohesive. We could have individuals that are hyper aggressive, and perhaps they're the social misfits, as I call them, that they don't get it, that there's a hierarchy. All sows have understood and agreed to this hierarchy. They could have a little bit of smaller fights, or they yell their dinosaur yells at each other when they're fighting for a best spot. But if there's one sow who, through a reason of genetics and environment and that interplay, this sow has the phenotype of hyperaggression, always going to the extreme of biting and inflicting lesions and pushing another one down when it's not appropriate. We need to be able to identify her early on and get her out of there so that we can have cohesion again in the group. So rather than allowing that one individual to just cause harm, no matter the pen that they're in, it's kind of a behavioral sickness that we don't want within our sows if we want to have everyone do their best in gestation.
Okay, so is there a specific way that we can measure behavior or like the personality or like this specifically this hyper aggressive personality?
Yes. So there are ways to look at it in sort of an experimental psychology lens where you place animals in a different environment and you kind of have paired assessment. It almost looks like it's like a gladiator style fighting ring, which is not. It could be not. It's time consuming, and it could get into encouraging fighting, which is not what we want. So rather than have pairwise fighting or trying to mirror what researchers in the rodent world do, where they have an animal in their home environment and then they introduce an intruder into their home environment and see how they are aggressive towards them. That's one way that it could be examined. I've taken the approach of just observing it naturally occurring at specific points of interest. So for aggression in sows, that's often at mixing. So at weaning and breeding time, and then if there's any other mixing for static pen creation or in a dynamic pen changes. Those are high risk points where the sows are given the opportunity to be aggressive because social aggression is so ingrained in their behavior repertoire when they establish their hierarchy that you can see individuals do nothing in response. You can see individuals have an appropriate level of defense or aggression or none. And then if you see those individuals at every occurrence, no matter the time and in multiple settings, they're the ones starting the fights and they're the ones not winning, but just starting fights and for no benefit. There's no resource they're fighting over. That's the opportunity you can take of making note during these time points that are already occurring on the barn. So just taking the time to watch and monitor, like, this sow 2248, she did it again, that kind of a thing.
And what about like if like producers have their own guilds that they're growing for sow, like are there already any traits like in guilds that you can see if they're going to be like those hyper aggressive sows later on? Like can they like kind of select for that? Or how does that work?
That's a great question because producers don't want to already observe the aggression happening in front of them. They want to prevent that from occurring in the first place. Um, so, in some of my research, I've found that, funny enough, the gilts that when you handle when they're 3 weeks old or 5 weeks old, and it could be occurring at weaning or any sort of processing occurrence, something that happens, we have a range of response in piglets, those that are silent and don't struggle, and those that vocalize the entire time, 30 seconds up to a minute of that handling experience, and are thrashing around physically. We found that those that are thrashing around physically, high pitch vocalizations, no breaks, when they continue to do that every time you hold them, 3 weeks old and 5 weeks old, no matter the person, they could grow up to be those hyper aggressive sows. Those sows that are more aggressive towards humans in a farrowing environment, and they're more aggressive towards other sows in the gestation environment. So we have some more hyperactive individuals where their response, no matter what that stimulus is, human, sow, being held, being approached, they're going to go full to the max, 100%. And there's no variation. Well, there could be some who have a little bit more protection of their piglets and farrowing, but they're not aggressive to other sows. That's not their personality trait. So yeah, when they're young gilts, it could be a good idea to keep an eye on those gilts that gave you such a hard time at handling or at moving, or they're just really, really hyperactive in terms of their vocalization, their activity. They might have something brewing in them as they develop.
That's very interesting. So, like, do you work with genetics companies to kind of look at this? Because, like, for a lot of it, it sounds like if it's already happening in like during the weaning and like that phase, like most of that is happening at the genetic companies, not so much at the commercial farms.
Right, yes. So I have worked with genetics companies with this interest of, can we target the aggressive gene?
Hmm.
And the tough answer is that behavior is not one gene driven. It's pleiotropy. You're gonna impact multiple things if you try and target one behavior. As we see in the domestication from wolf to dogs, when we target, you know, being docile with humans, we accidentally got black and white coloring in the fur, which we did not intend to do. So we're going to do something to the pigs if we try and either use CRISPR-Cas9 setting to find the gene and reduce it. Some after effects could happen. And selective breeding is what we're already doing. And for all the variety of swine breeds that do well, for what they eat and how, if they're hardy or not to, Tamworths or the Michons and what have you. So I don't know if that's the answer. Selective breeding could help get us more docility as we already have gotten with domestication. But the social hierarchy is so vital core to all aspects of a pig's life. How they eat, where they sleep, where they mate, everything is about social hierarchy, which means everything is about some level of fighting. So we can't stop fighting, but maybe we can pay attention to whether or not hyperaggression is heritable. That we don't know yet.
Okay, so more research to
More
do.
research, yes.
Very interesting. So, any other like interesting tidbits around personality?
I found that the sows that were really interested in their physical environment, if they were alone in a room or when they're walking down the hallway, the sows that seemed to be kind of like, come on, get on with it when you're trying to move her and she's smelling and licking and smelling and licking. Those are also the sows that when you put them in a group with different sows, they don't fight. They just smell and lick every single individual. So there's a trait that seems to be about information seeking or exploratory. There are some sows that are just, if it's a physical environment or another animal, they want to know more. And then the opposite spectrum, there's some sows that kind of have blinders on. They don't pay attention to their environment. They don't interact with other social sows, and they just kind of shut down and they're much more isolated. I don't know if that impacts their reproduction or their welfare. It just seems to be a style of interacting with their environment.
So, like, yeah, when you mention that, like, I'm thinking then is the sow that is licking everything also the one that has the higher chance of starting tail biting?
Oh,
Have you looked at that?
I have not, but that would make sense that she's stimulation seeking.
Yeah.
And so anything to be active and using the brain and yeah, seeking something to fill her day. Yeah, certainly.
It'll be very interesting to see like what comes out of the next research you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing your insights on sow personality. Because honestly, I think a lot of us, even though we work with sows every day, we don't necessarily understand what their personalities are and how many different personalities there are. Like, is there actually some? Can you say like there are specific personality types? Like, can you say like there's this many?
In my research, we focus on traits where there may be, say, 3 to 5 core traits that differentiate the animals. And then each animal is somewhere on that spectrum of a trait of the extreme. So that's more of how we see personality. Like specific traits for animals can be at any level.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, well, thank you so much. So, like you mentioned, 3 to 5 traits. So, can you explain what those traits are then?
Yes, let's see if I can remember. There's some that just keep coming up in a variety of species for both wild and domesticated species. Um, Boldness or shyness, that spectrum, aggressive to non aggressive, active or non active in their day in the life, exploratory or not exploratory, seeking in information or not, and then finally social or non-social, and that's really only applied for if the species is a social species. Solitary species, it doesn't apply, but there's some level of where individuals are consistently at closer to one extreme or the other throughout their lives, and the theory is that it's just a strategy of all animals can't be bold and aggressive and because there'll be too much competition. So some come up with strategy B to be more shy, take small rewards, have this and that, and they still have their offspring survive and so on.
And like you mentioned earlier, that personality is generally something that doesn't change with the seasons, with the time of the day, etc. But can personality change in a lifetime of an animal, or is like that's the personality they'll have for their entire lives?
That is what is still being researched. It looks like there could be a very large event that could alter the strategy for the animal. But for the most part, especially after sexual maturity, a lot of species are kind of locked into their strategy. They've learned and developed. Um, so it certainly after sexual maturity, it's consistent. Leading up to it in adolescence, there could be a bit more flexibility in developing that trait.
It's time for our famous three.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. So now we're going to the final 3 questions. So the first one is, what is your favorite swine-related book or resource?
So, for learning more about pigs, I like to read the latest scientific article on animal behavior as it relates to livestock. So, applied animal behavior science is my journal of choice to read about the international community that's studying pig management and pig welfare and behavior.
And that's, I guess, also where you send a lot of your articles to.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, perfect. And then, do you have a favorite book or research resource outside of agriculture?
Yes, for I'm currently reading it. It is scientific because I'm an animal science nerd. I just love both both topics. It's a book on sentience using a variety of animals, and it's looking at like how there's a certain species of shrimp that see all of these colors that humans can't see, and describing the quality of vision for that species. And it goes through different species in hearing or touch. And it's a really neat way to really have perspective on how other animals on this planet experience life, that it's really tough for us to understand because we're just primates, we're just human.
So, do you know the name and the author of that book by any chance?
The author's name is escaping me, but it's called Animal Sentience.
Okay, cool, because that sounds really interesting. And then the last question is, in your opinion, what sets successful swine professionals apart from those that are not?
I think a great quality in swine producers that I've been lucky to interact with is patience. Patience in training staff to work with pigs. As those of us who work with pigs know, they will challenge you and they'll never stop surprising you and challenging you and finding a way to escape or turn around. And then having that management strategy go through the kind of chain of command to patience with the animals. Like, just wait, give her a moment. There you go. See, Sal will move forward, or like, just give her a moment to turn around. And so, patience, it's so difficult. And I speak from experience as a mother. Patience is so difficult, but it really has heaps of benefits in the end that I think a swine producer can see if that's kind of a routine in their practice.
Okay, that's a very great answer. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much for being on the show with us again. I really enjoyed this episode, and this concludes another episode of the Swine Canada podcast show presented by Wisenetics. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcasts to stay updated on future episodes, and please give your feedback because that is very valuable to us. So this is Miranda Smith from the Swine Canada podcast show signing off. Until next time.